Max's 12th birthday Pac-Man cake. Part 1, Pac-Man and Ghost cookies. These are the cookies I used to decorate the cake with. In the bowl is a half a cup of butter and a third of a cup of shortening, and I just blend this together till it's light and fluffy. I'm going to add 1 cup of white granulated sugar, 1 egg. There's also a half a teaspoon of vanilla that you don't see in there, and this is 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder. And just going to blend this together. And then add 1/3 of a cup of sour cream. Blend that together, and then you're going to incorporate 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. I'm putting it in all at once here, but you should probably do it a little at a time, otherwise the flour is going to fly all over like it's doing right now. But I was a bit in a hurry for this. And then stir it a little bit with a wooden spoon or spatula in this case, if the mixer is not doing a good job, and then finally with your hands to make a dough ball. Cut the dough ball in half and then refrigerate the pieces for about 2 hours to make it easier to handle. Then you're going to roll out the dough between 2 pieces of wax paper or parchment paper to about 1/4 inch thick. I only used half the dough for this. The other half's in the freezer. I'm going to make cookies some other day. And then I'm going to make the Pac-Man shapes. Now, to make the Pac-Man shapes, I didn't have Pac-Man cookie cutters, so I'm going to improvise. I'm just using a circle. And for the ghosts, I'm using this. This is a Halloween skull cookie cutter. And you'll see what I'm going to do to make this into a ghost afterwards. So I'm just cutting a few of these out. And then I'm going to cut out a section of the circle to make the Pac-Man mouth. And then they're going to go in a greased cookie sheet or one that has parchment paper on it, or in this case I'm using my silicone mat. The recipe says ungreased cookie sheet, but I find that you're probably better off to grease them. Now for the ghosts, I'm just cutting the bottom off the skulls off to give you that a little bit more than a semicircle shape. And then I'm just going to cut the bottom to look like they do on the Pac-Man game, the bottoms of the ghosts. I'm just making little triangle shapes with the knife. And those are going on the cookie sheet. This is a really nice, easy dough to work with. And I'm making some more Pac-Man with the first half of the dough because I had some left over. And for the ghost shape, I thought I'd try this bell shape. And all I'm going to do is just cut off the bottom part of the bell and then the little top part. And then you have a ghost shape, at least the Pac-Man ghost shape. And then once again, I'm cutting with the bottom of the ghost. Now those are baked at 375 degrees for about 7 or 8 minutes until the bottoms are just lightly browned. And as soon as they come out of the oven, if you want to, you can just recut some of those little triangle shapes. If they've lost their crispness, you can do that while the cookie is still hot. If you do it while the cookie is still hot, you have less of a chance of cracking the cookie in half. And I'm just trimming some of the edges here just so that they're a little bit neater. Now for the glazed icing that's going to go on the cookies to decorate those, I put 2 cups of icing sugar in the bowl, 1/4 cup of warm water, and then putting 4 teaspoons of meringue powder. Meringue powder is actually powdered egg whites, and I buy this at the bulk food store. 4 teaspoons of that, and then you're going to add 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. And then you're going to blend this together. The recipe says to blend it until it is stiff. I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to blend it until you'll notice the color changing. It becomes a lot whiter and a lot creamier and thicker. And then I'm going to separate it into 4 bowls because I want 4 colors. And then I'm going to proceed to tint the bowls the colors of the ghosts in Pac-Man, which are pink, orange, blue, and yellow. Well, actually, yellow is for the Pac-Man. Blue, pink, and orange for the ghosts. And I'm using paste food color, just a tiny little bit on the end of a toothpick does the trick. And then you need to thin it out. You need to thin it out with a little bit of water, like a half teaspoon at a time, until you get a glazing consistency. You just want something that's going to flow nicely off a spoon, but it's not going to be too runny. Kind of like that. That's why I think beating this royal icing until it's stiff is silly, because you're going to thin it out anyway. And then just take a spoonful of it and then just drizzle it over top of the cookies and let it flow over the edges of the cookie until all the parts of it are coated. Now obviously I've put this on a cookie rack on top of a cookie sheet so that the drips will go right through and there'll be an airspace between the cookie and the surface you're working with. And you just kind of go around with a spoon and just making sure all the edges are covered with some color. And then you're just going to let these dry overnight or for a few hours, and the icing will actually dry quite hard and nice and shiny and makes very pretty cookies. You can also use a knife to just scrape off any excess drips on the bottom. So you can see how nice and dry and hard they are. Makes a nice coating on them. And then we're going to decorate them. I'm actually using an icing bag with a decorated tip here instead of a Ziploc bag. And this is just plain old white buttercream. And then black dot for the Pac-Man eye. And I know that some of you Pac-Man purists may say Pac-Man does not have an eye, but I thought I need to put one. I thought he looked silly without one. And here is the little blinky ghost. And then I'm just putting finishing touches on the eyes. And if you have those little peaks, just let the icing dry a little bit and you'll be able to push those peaks down with your finger or a spoon and it'll be a lot smoother looking. Now for the actual cake and the icing. The cake I made was a yellow cake and a chocolate cake. I kind of made a double layer, kind of a marbleized cake. And here is the cake. It's very large. I overbaked it a bit, so it was extremely dry. In fact, I ended up throwing out a good chunk of the cake because I didn't like it at all. So I'm not going to give you the recipe for this particular cake because I really didn't enjoy it. I'm going to stick with my tried and true recipes that I've made before. This was kind of a new one that I made. But you see how dark the edges are? It was overbaked. And also, I normally would trim the tops off to make it nice and flat. But it was fairly flat, and I was pressed for time, so I didn't want to cut the top off the cake. But it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too domed, so it was pretty good. Now, for the background of the main icing of the cake is black, for the black background of the video game. So I'm adding a little bit of black food paste coloring and mixing together. Now, you'll notice how the color here is like a slate gray. Well, one thing about icing is that as it sits, the color darkens as the icing dries out. So you'll see how dark black this is going to get. And then I'm just icing the cake, trying to make it as smooth as possible. And one thing about working with buttercream, a trick I either read or learned from somebody is the following. You'll see in a second here. I've got a container of hot water. I'm just dipping the spatula in the container of hot water and just shaking off almost all the water, leaving just a tiny film. And this lets you smooth the icing off quite nicely. And if you get good at this, you can make a buttercream cake look almost as smooth as fondant. There's the finished cake, and that's what I'm trying to make it look like a Pac-Man Pac-Man video game. I saw this one online. I like that idea, so I'm going to use that idea and make it my own. That cake board I bought at the local bulk food store that sells cake decorating supplies. I'm using a toothpick here just to mark off where I want to put the details on the cake. So it gives you an idea where you're going to place things. So it keeps you from having to move things and having to smooth your icing down if you make mistakes. So I'm just planning it out in my head where I'm going to put all the yellow Smarties. These are Canadian Smarties, which are the equivalent to an American M&M. They're little yellow candy-coated chocolates. And I'm just placing them there. Those are like the little yellow dots in the Pac-Man game. That larger one, which is the power-up over it, whatever you want to call it, that is a candy melting wafer. And I'm writing Happy B-Day Max with the yellow dots. And then I'm just going to finish it off. Once again, I want to put the blue lines on the game board on the video game, I should say. So I'm just marking off where the lines should go, and I'm just using pre-made commercial icing on the tube and just marking it off. Great thing about these Wilton icing tubes is that the decorator tips with a coupler fits right on there. So for small jobs like this where you want nice blue icing, I just buy it like this if it's just for a small job. It's very convenient. And then I'm just placing the cookies that I made on the cake. Now you can see I'm doing some kind of changes as I go here, so I'm trying to fit them all on. I made the cookies perhaps just a little bit too big. I should have made them a little bit smaller. However, they still were really cute. And I'm just kind of adding in blue lines as I go here. And the other cookies, I decided to stick them to the side of the cake. And you can see how they're a little bit too tall for the sides of the cake. That's why I say I should have made them a little smaller. And I did some cherries with some red Smarties, a little bit of green icing. And I put the extra Pac-Man that I had as extra lives on the side of the cake. And there it is, finished Happy Birthday Max cake. Max loved it. He had requested a Pac-Man cake for his birthday. And he helped me pick out one based on some photos we saw on the internet. And there's the cake. You can see I did like a marbleized chocolate and white cake. The recipe I used I didn't like, so I'm not going to be using that again. But the kids liked it, and there were no complaints.